I'm going to start again. Good evening, everyone. My name is Joan McAlpine. I'm the Business Development Manager of the Robert Burns Ellisland Trust, and I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you tonight to the latest online lecture in our Spring into Burns series. Tonight, we are joined by our own Vice Chair, Dr. David Hopes. Dr. Hopes Dr. Hopes is currently the head of Leeds Museums and Galleries, and he was previously head of collections and interiors at the National Trust for Scotland. And before that, and crucially for our purposes here tonight, he was director of the Robert Burns Birthplace Museum in Alloway. And he has also been a research fellow at the Shakespeare Birthplace Trust. So he has a knowledge of both the National Bards of Scotland and England. David has a PhD from the University of Birmingham, focused on museum and digital, and a master's degree in museum studies from the University of Leicester. So he's eminently well qualified and one of the world's leading Burns experts. And tonight he's going to talk to us about the treasures of Ellisland, which is about our wonderful collection here at Ellisland and how it was built up. So thank you very much to all of you for attending. I'm going to say goodbye now and hand you over to Dr. Hopes.
Thanks, Joan, and good evening, everyone. It's a great honour, actually, to be joining you, albeit virtually. Joan and Ellis are at Ellisland, which is great to see, and there's a lot of exciting things happening there. I can't wait to go back. I'm going to speak about three things tonight in this short talk about the treasures of Ellisland. The first thing I'm going to speak about is the chronology of the development of the Ellisland collection. So I'll give you a quick timeline as to how it came to be. I'd then like to look at 5 objects in focus and what they tell us about the person of Burns or the place that is Ellisland. And then I'd like to finish by speculating as to how the collection might support the Trust's vision for Ellisland. And then I think we've got time for questions after that. So, but by all means, field questions into the chat, and we'll try to pick up as many as possible. So how did the Ellisland collection come to be? How did it develop into what we have today? Now, it's not a huge collection. It's about 650 items in total, which is made up of about 200 3D artifacts, 150 books, and 300 archive items. And it took a hell of a long time to grow, the best part of 100 years. So 650 items, 100 years of growth, that's about 6.5 objects per year, which isn't great. And the collection's growth wasn't linear. It came to Ellisland in bursts of activity. Now, I think that was in large part down to the Trust's meagre finances, as well as the narrowness of their field of vision, which concerned Ellisland only. I think they felt there was a hole in the story of Burns at this particular site, and any resources that could be mustered must be spent filling it alone, rather than seeking to tell the whole story of Burns like you find at other sites in Scotland. That led to passive but targeted collecting at Ellisland. Now, I'm just going to share my screen because I have a presentation, you'll be glad to know, rather than just staring at me. Let's have a look. Let's go from this slide here. Okay, I hope everyone can see that. And we're at the wrong slide, which is a great start. Okay, so there we are, the first slide. So what were the milestones through a century of collecting? So I'd like to give you a quick whistle-stop tour about how the collection came to be at Ellisland. Between 1791, which was the date or the year that Burns moved out of Ellisland, and 1921, Ellisland was a private working farm, which did draw Burns admirers, but theirs was essentially an outdoor experience. In terms of collections and interiors, this is something of a dark age, which deserves a lot more research. We get some flashes of light, some clues as to how it was left by Burns, that is the farmhouse and the farm itself. For example, the English poet William Howitt noted on a visit to the cottage in 1845 that Burns's bedroom has yet 2 beds in it, of that sort of cupboard fashion, with check curtains, which are so often seen in Scotch farmhouses. The humble rooms are much as they were in his time, that is Burns's time. However, more information is emerging on how the interior of the farmhouse looked in the period 1788 to 91, which I'll talk about later. So it's no surprise, therefore, that the earliest images of Ellisland are of the exterior of the building, such as this view of the farmhouse in Riverside, based on a painting by David Octavius Hill for his Land of Burns series in 1840. Now, this object is from the collection. It's on display in the granary at Ellisland, and it's an undated edition of the poems of Burns with hand-painted Mockingbird cover. We can, however, date this particular edition of Burns from at least the 1850s because there's an extension to the cottage, which is just visible on the brow of the hill. The main focal points during that period, that dark age from 1791 to 1921, the main focal points were outside and associated with particular works written by Burns. So the walkway you can see coming up from the river to the farm itself is associated with Tam O'Shanter and the writing of it in 1790. The stackyard, which is not in view but on the far side of the cottage, is associated with the writing of the song To Mary in Heaven, to Mary Campbell, as we know. And a building far off in the distance, about half a mile upstream on the River Nith, is the Hermitage. This building here, which Burns was given a key to by Robert Riddle of Glenriddle, the landowner. And there were particular works, a range of works actually written in this building, or its predecessor rather, because this was reconstructed in the late 19th century. And that included lines written on a pane of glass, which you can see there on the right-hand side of the slide. And these came back to Ellisland in 1937, donated by Arthur Basil Simpson of Wiltshire. Now, Simpson had initially loaned this item, this pane of glass, for exhibition in Burns House Museum in Dumfries, which started in 1903, 1904. And he loaned it via Dumfries Burns Club, but was persuaded to give the pane of glass to Ellisland, since, and I quote, "it has been decided to collect their relics pertaining to the poet, particularly those associated with that property or the period of Burns's occupancy thereof." So the place specificity of the trust collecting position had already been well established and was already well known. So back to our timeline. 1921 was a significant year for Ellisland. It was saved for the British nation by an Edinburgh wool merchant and Burns enthusiast, George Williamson, who'd actually been trying to secure the farm for about 30 years, but he finally got his way in 1921. Now, I've tried to find an image of George Williamson, but can't. But if you have a spare £3,000, you can buy his mourning ring, which is up for sale on the internet. Actually, this is the mourning ring on the left-hand side, and it's inscribed to George Williamson of Ellisland. Unfortunately, George died the following year in 1922, but his brother passed the farm to a charitable trust in 1928. The Ellisland Trust, as it was known, assumed ownership, but without an endowment to call on for funds, and with various curbs on what could and couldn't be done. For example, no ball games, no picnics, no fun whatsoever. That did limit the activities of Ellisland Trust. The Trust recruited a live-in custodian who was required to provide access to the bedroom of Burns and to the parlour or spence, where a collection was slowly formed for the enjoyment of visitors. Now, the Ellisland Trust had trouble with the first tenant because the minutes say that the first tenant was reluctant to admit visitors on the pretense of perpetual spring cleaning, which I think is quite funny. They didn't have any problems with the successor to that tenant, and the farmhouse itself, or at least one room within it, the spence, became the main showroom for a growing collection. 1931 to 41 was the golden age of collecting for Ellisland, thanks largely to the efforts of trustees Matthew McKerrow, who's shown here, who was a Dumfries solicitor, and John McBurney, who was the Sheriff Clerk. Both were members of Dumfries Burns Club, and McKerrow was president of the Burns Federation, and used his position to raise the profile of Ellisland and to acquire artifacts through donations. During this time, the Trust acquired some of its star items, such as all of the manuscripts it owns in the hand of Burns, key personal objects such as the poet's shaving mirror, fishing rod and sword, and many items relating to the poet's wife, Jean, which we'll look at in just a minute. In the 1940s and 50s, the Trust also added artifacts which helped to domesticate the cottage interior, including chairs, tables, and a period grate for the spence, having failed to persuade Burns Cottage, where I used to work, to part with the original, and it's still in position in Burns Cottage. That was the original from Spence, at Ellisland. Fast forward to 1967, and a small folk museum was created in the upper room of the granary, which had served up until that point as a ploughman's dwelling house. The main source of artifacts was a private concern, Major Mercith's folk museum collection from Thornhill, which had been broken up after his death. Less than 6 years later, the granary exhibition was closed due to higher costs and the difficulty of adequate supervision, the physical separation of the two main focal points, the spence in the farmhouse and the granary, no doubt proving too much for a single member of staff. However, in 1979, the granary once again became a display venue for the same agricultural collection, Major Mercith's folk museum collection, but it was this time curated by the National Museum of Scotland. Work began in January of that year, 1979, in converting the space into an interpretation centre, the purpose of which was to illustrate the seasonal round of farming. And you can see how it looked in the 1980s in this slide. So that's inside the granary. The next and last major intervention in terms of the collecting activities of Ellisland Trust came in 1995 in anticipation of the 200th anniversary of the poet's death the following year, 1996. Led by consultants MKW Design with writer James A. Mackay and Richard Jacks, who was an architect of Carlisle, acting as consultants, the Ellisland Trust invested somewhere in the region of £120,000, including almost £13,000 for the conservation of artefacts. Now, their brief was the reinstatement of the original farmhouse to how it was laid out in Burns's time, and within it, interpretive presentations on aspects of Burns's life and achievements whilst at Ellisland. So it retained very much that focus on the period and Ellisland itself. The consultant's report was highly critical of the layout prior to 1996, which can be seen in the photograph on the left-hand side. And they said about making changes, and you can see the after, if you like. So there's a before on the left and the after on the right, which included a new decorative scheme and lighting, encased displays with improved security, conservation and appearance, the replacement of woodwork with including the Spence fire surround. They introduced a period bureau with, as I'm sure everyone will remember, a very strange looking mannequin of Burns hard at work sat at the bureau. And they improved the environmental conditions, which allowed for loans of 6 artifacts from Her Majesty's Customs and Excise, including a dipping rod, malt slide rule, weighing scales, and a hydrometer from the period, and also loans from Dumfries museums, some of which we still have today. However, these changes were criticised by many in Burns circles and didn't lead to a huge increase in visitor numbers. And that led, in most part, to the establishment of a Friends organisation in 1998, which was formed to assist the Trust with the administration of the farm. Now, this went beyond administration and included responsibility for curatorial arrangements at Ellisland. Over the next decade, the Friends led on the accumulation of a sizable collection of domestic articles, utensils and implements from yesteryear, as well as Burnsiana. The next major event came in 2018. The curator moved out. You might think, well, so what? Well, this changed the model at Ellisland. It changed options in terms of the presentation of the farmhouse. The full farmhouse was viewable then to the public, but it also started draining the tank financially for the Trust. 2020, the Ellisland Trust was dissolved and its assets transferred to a new charity, Robert Burns Ellisland Trust. 2 years on, we now have more of an idea of the future direction of Ellisland, and I'll return to that in a moment. But before I do, I'd like to look at 5 highlights from the collection as promised. The first of these is a manuscript. It's a manuscript of the poem on seeing a wounded hare, on seeing a fellow wound a hare with a shot, in the distinctive, gracious handwriting of Burns. It's included in a letter from Burns to his friend, the lawyer Alexander Cunningham, dated the 4th of May, 1789. It came into the collection in 1937, a gift from the same donor who donated the inscribed glass from the Hermitage that we saw earlier. Now, Burns was moved to write this work after encountering a mortally wounded hare, which had been shot by a young man, a chap called James Thompson, who was the son of a neighbouring farmer, yards from the window of his Spence. I think the time is important, April 1789. So it's written in the late spring, which is a time of new life and a time of family. Burns was already feeling settled at Ellisland with his new family, and he's able to empathise with a fellow creature who can no longer call the thickening brakes or verdant plains home. In his letter to Cunningham, Burns wonders if the second last stanza, which is in this manuscript, would best be omitted. Perhaps a mother's anguish adds its woe. The playful pair crowd fondly by thy side, our helpless nurslings, who will now provide that life a mother only can bestow. They perhaps mirrored his own situation at Ellisland with a wife and a growing family. Regardless of that, these lines were left out when the poem was published in 1793, and the poem has thereafter been known in the abbreviated form. So this manuscript coming back to Ellisland is truly unique. It's an evocative work which connects intimately with the site and epitomizes the place-specific nature of the collection and conveys Burns's credentials as a romantic poet and an enlightened farmer. As well as the 3 Ellisland years being a time of writing, it was also a time for reading and learning. One of Burns's achievements during the Ellisland period was the setting up of a local subscription library, the Monkland Friendly Society Library, established in 1788 and 89 by Burns and his neighbour and collaborator Robert Riddle of Glenriddle, who owned the Hermitage. Therefore, it's no surprise that the Ellisland Trust's first acquisitions were books. The minutes of the Trust, which we still have, thank God, note that about 40 books were gifted by the Dunsker Library Committee in June 1931. Now, these were unlikely to have been from the library set up by Burns, which was broken up in 1789, but they were a simulacrum of that library, supplemented by books mentioned by Burns. In other words, they were symbolic of the reading environment of Ellisland rather than the actual copies which belonged at Ellisland. The Dunsker donation was added to in 1938 by 10 books from the poet's great-granddaughter, Miss Jean Armour Burns Brown, which may have been part of the Poets' Library, such as this book here on the left-hand side, which is Wingate's Common Arithmetic, owned by Burns and inscribed by him, and it dates from 1724. In 1932, the Trust acquired a mahogany bookcase, which you can see on the right-hand side, which once belonged, curiously enough, to the poet and playwright Robert Browning in his London home for the last 2 years of his life. So that was at 29 De Vere Gardens. It was perhaps thought appropriate because of the fact he was a poet too, but it's worthy of more research. So things in the Spence, which is where we find the book and the bookcase, aren't quite as they seem. Most of the books are new to the room and are representative of the world of books known to Burns. And the bookcase symbolizes the status of books to Burns, his attempts to build a library, and the bookcase carries with it the aura of another writer. Another of Burns's achievements at Ellisland was songwriting. Here, Burns produced a quarter of his entire musical output in only 3 years, including, of course, Auld Lang Syne. Now, this is a flute made by the London maker C.G. Brock of Bishopsgate, near Liverpool Street Station, in fact, and it belonged to Robert Burns. Now, although Burns wasn't widely known for playing such an instrument, Robert Crawford, who wrote The Bard and has done a lot of research on Burns, writes that Burns learned to read music with some competence and later attempted to play the German flute, and this is a German flute. Certainly, James Oswald's Caledonian Pocket Companion of 1747 was a very influential music book for Burns, and it contained a number of tunes with variations for the German flute. So it's conceivable that he tried to play the instrument at Ellisland. Given Burns's songwriting activity at Ellisland and the pastoral connotations of the instrument, which McKerrow tells us was handed down to the poet's son, James Glencairn Burns, the flute was accepted in good faith by the Ellisland Trust and exhibited straight away. I'll return to the flute in just a moment. Our fourth artifact is a likeness of Burns here on the left-hand side. It's a bronze statuette of Burns by Henry Snell Gamley, who was a pupil of Edward Lanterry and William Grant Stevenson. The Gamley was the leading bronze sculptor in Scotland in the early 20th century. And he was also involved in another Burns-related sculpture, the Memorial to Clarinda in Canongate Churchyard, which was unveiled in 1922. 6 years later, in 1928, he hired Auguste Rodin's studio in Paris to work on a statue of Robert Burns for export to Cheyenne in Wyoming. The Ellisland statuette is a limited edition #2, says on the base, miniature, which was taken from the model of the Wyoming statue, which was unveiled in 1929. And you can see from this photograph, the dedication in a very cold-looking Cheyenne. The statue in Cheyenne was actually commissioned by an Ayrshire-born widow of an American cattle rancher. So really interesting connection there to Ellisland in this particular likeness of Burns. Now, in focusing so much on Burns at Ellisland, I think it's easy to lose sight of the other people who lived at Ellisland, not least his wife, Jean Armour. Our fifth and final artifact is actually a group of items which relate to Jean, the poet's wife. And I think we often need to triangulate artifacts to find Jean, which is a bit of a pity. These are domestic items which remind us of the Burns's first marital home at Ellisland and Jean's quiet influence on Burns as farmer and poet. Her nursing stool is seen on the bottom right-hand side. Cotton hat on the left-hand side, or mutch, was perfect for working in the dairy at Ellisland. Now, Jean was only 23 years old when she came to Ellisland and had met Robert only 3 years before, but had already mothered 4 children by Robert. So the nursing stool was well used by that stage. Only Robert survived of the 4, and you can see Robert's photograph on the left-hand side. That's Robert Burns Jr. But while at Ellisland, Jean gave birth to 2 more sons, Francis Wallace in 1789, who's not in any of the photographs, but William Nicol is in the centre. He was born in 1791. We also have locks of hair of some of the sons in the collection. In Jean's spare time, if she had any, she managed the household and the dairy to keep the farm running, particularly as Burns switched his attention to the excise full-time in the autumn of 1789. The Jean's capable singing voice, her wood notes wild as Burns described them, must have played a big part in Burns's collection, adaptation and creation of songs at Ellisland. Her role and her voice deserves to be amplified, and we will certainly do that at Ellisland. Now, for the final part of this talk, I'd like to briefly look at how the collection might support the Trust's vision for Ellisland. And this is the vision, and I might just read it out to you if that's okay. Ellisland is the place to fall in love with Burns. We will increase awareness of Ellisland as central to the artistic development of Robert Burns in poetry and romantic song. We will enhance understanding of the site as the best place to see the natural world through the poet's eyes. We will create a world-class visitor experience and a vibrant centre for creative learning to ensure the unique collection, buildings and landscape are as accessible to a diverse range of modern audiences. So themes of creativity and learning, environment and visitor experience and conservation are very important to the new Trust. So how might the collections and the built heritage support the Trust's ambitions? So I'd like to speculate on a few ideas, and they are just my ideas. I need to discuss these with the board and get their approval, and we will also do a lot of public consultation, don't worry. Our intention is to conserve the spirit of Ellisland as well as the material heritage. I think the two go hand in hand. Anyone who's been to Ellisland will appreciate its unique atmosphere. And I think we should aim to do that by carefully conserving through use. For example, the flute we looked at earlier, which is seen here again in the Spence, symbolises what makes the Ellisland period of Burns's life so significant: music and song. So we intend bringing the flute back into use to conserve what is special about the instrument, its tangible as well as its intangible heritage, its playability. So we would aim to bring it back into use to better conserve the instrument, of course have protocols around careful use of the instrument, but also to recapture what makes the instrument special, its playability. At the same time, we aim to raise standards of care and for the collection, the 650 items, and we should be applying for museum accreditation later this year. We might also do the same for built heritage, conserved through use. These are 2 plans of the cottage, how we think it was laid out at the time of Burns on the left-hand side, and how it is today on the right-hand side. The extension which houses the kitchen, as we know it, was added on in the 1840s, we think. So my view is that we should seek to re-authenticate the cottage, but respect the fact that it is part of a longer story of occupation since Burns, and that has heritage value. So this might involve relocating the kitchen to its original position, opening up circulation routes known to Burns, but without removing the 1840s extension, which now accommodates the kitchen, which we can see here. So this is the existing kitchen, which has the apparatus of such a room. If we were to re-authenticate the cottage along the lines I described, it would mean moving the range to the site of the original kitchen, but retaining a purposefulness across the house, rather than trying to recreate or create a sterile museum experience. My abiding memory of first visiting Ellisland was entering this room when the range was in use. And I was given tea and biscuits by Les, who was the custodian then, so I'll never forget it actually. But it's that kind of experience that I think we shouldn't lose sight of. This re-authentication might mean using the rooms for a variety of activities, from learning to songwriting to catering. Let's not forget this was a home, and it was a place of creativity for Burns, and we would want to reflect and retain this in any changes that we make. What information might we use to reconstruct the cottage known to Burns? Well, we're indebted to Historic Environment Scotland for a large amount of funding to pay for a conservation management plan, which was written by Will Napier. And you might have seen some press on that. In fact, you might even have been at Will's talk, which provides us a forensic study of built heritage and gives us much more confidence in making changes around the built heritage. Now, so we have that report. We also have surviving fixtures and fittings from the cottage. For example, the original fire mantle, which you saw in one of the earlier slides, had been removed at some point. It then reappeared in the 1896 exhibition in Glasgow, was then reinstated by trustees in 1938, and it disappeared again in 1995, but it's in storage. So we still have that original mantle, which we could put back in its original location. We also find clues to how the cottage looked between 1788 and 91 in the archives. We know that Burns had a silhouette of himself taken by John Mears in the summer of 1788. And he told his friend Robert Ainslie that he intended hanging it with silhouettes of Lord Glencairn, one of his patrons, and Dr. Blacklock on his new mantelpiece at Ellisland Farm. So without straining things, we have enough clues to begin to understand how the interior might have looked at the time of Burns. We also now know from some recently discovered documents the specifications of the interior from their original build, such as door dimensions, window finishes, etc. And that will be the subject of a future talk, I'm pretty sure. We also need to clearly do more investigation into the building fabric. So paint scrape analysis, dendrochronology, and looking underneath finishes. As well as improving the environment itself. You can probably detect on the wall, the far wall there next to the wall case, there's a blistering of paint, which is dampness. So it's not an especially conducive environment at the moment for visitors or for the collection. So we mean to do something about that. But finally, I spoke about, at the beginning about the narrowness of collecting. Another thing we might do at Ellisland is enlarge the story and the visitor experience there. That might involve making more of the paths network. We have 170 acres of land in total, as well as a beautiful river. And that would allow us then to talk about the connection between Burns and the environment, as well as promoting active travel. We might build metaphorical and physical links to other sites, for example, Friars Carse and here, this is Dalswinton House, to widen the field of view and reconstruct, if you like, the social environment known to Burns. So some sort of connection across the river to Dalswinton, to have that tenant farm and big house narrative running. We also might address some of the gaps in what we have at Ellisland through new collecting. Our art could be better. It's probably a weak area in the collection, despite the gambling that I showed you earlier. I spoke about Jean earlier. I think there's a need for alternative perspectives on Burns to be represented in the collection. We could also add more depth to the story of Ellisland before and after Burns through more archive research and through archaeology, as well as bringing temporary exhibitions to change the offer at Ellisland. All up for discussing all of this and consulting, but I think it's an exciting new chapter for Ellisland, and I hope the collection will be central to this. If you'd like more information, my email address is at the bottom of the slide. Also, just a plug, if you're interested in Burns Chronicle, the first of 2 articles by myself has been published on the museum history of Ellisland in the March edition of the Burns Chronicle. Ellisland and Museum History, Restocking and Reframing 1921 to 1953 was published last month. The second part, I'm not sure when it's coming out. I think it might be the autumn. But if you drop me an email, I can probably let you know when it's out. Thanks very much. I'll stop sharing the screen now, and if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, David. That was absolutely fascinating. And as you say, there's so much more of the Ellisland story to tell, but that was such a rich lecture, and just shed new light on what we know about Ellisland. So thank you very much. Could also give a shout out to our curatorial volunteer, Niamh Gilfillan. I'm not sure if she's here tonight, but she has been cataloguing the books that David talked about, and we hope to develop that into a wider research project as well. So thank you very much to Niamh for everything she's doing there. And I'm just seeing if there's anything in the chat. I can't see the chat, but I don't know if that's because I'm not a host.
I don't think there is anything in the chat, actually. So got off lightly. Yeah, I should just say that, yeah, thank you, Niamh, if you're here, or even if you're not, for all the work you've done in cataloguing. All of that is now accessible via our website. So we have a catalogue on eHive. So if you go to our website, you look at the collections pages, you'll get a link to the catalogue, actually. So we're really pleased to share that with the world.
Yes, thank you again, Niamh. We do have a question here. First question from Alan Beck, thanking David for his presentation. He points out that the romantic song repertoire owes a lot to Ellisland. So what sort of events could reflect this? Good
question. Yeah, I mean, Professor Carruthers, who's our secretary, says of Ellisland that it's one of the birthing places of European Romanticism. I think there's lots we can do just in terms of the period, in terms of period performances, and the works of Burns, but also I think looking to the future as well, and hosting contemporary music as well. So I wouldn't like to think that we're just focusing on the Burns period and romantic song, even though it's such a rich resource. I think that could inspire modern work as well. And there are lots of musicians in the Dumfries area, I know, who would love the chance of recording at Ellisland and writing new material there.
Yes, thanks very much. And if I could give a shout out to our youth music. I think I'm muted, am I?
No, I can hear you. Yeah.
If I could give a shout out to our youth music volunteer Rose Byers, who put on a wonderful youth concert in December last year, our last event before Omicron, and so we hope to have more of that kind of event in the future. So thank you, Rose, for that. Our next question is from Mark Sherland to everyone. How do you see the artist engagement with Ellisland working?
Okay, do you want me to try and?
Yeah, or I think we've got quite a lot, and there's obviously a lot of musicians here tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
From Nicola Black as well, who's a musician. That's more of a comment saying how thought-provoking it is. I don't know if you want to talk about artist engagement. I guess you've kind of answered that.
To an extent, well, I mean, I think programs of events, residencies. I mean, we have a bungalow on site which is being done up at the moment, don't we, Joan? Which would give us a bit of accommodation on site, which might be of use in the future, as well as trying to earn some income for the trust. But I think the site is one thing, but we have a trustee in the States actually, who's not here tonight, but Ellisland is known across the world. So I would like to think that Ellisland online as well could be something. I think we've emerged from the pandemic and we're still using different platforms to promote the site, and it doesn't matter that we're not all there. So I think the site itself could be host for programme of events, for residencies and that kind of thing, with some support probably from Creative Scotland and funders, as well as using, the World Wide Web and digital as well. But yeah, and so I'm just looking at the chat here. Next Burns Chronicle is out in October. Thanks, Bill. And Rose is indeed a wee star.
She certainly is. We've also got a comment from Lenny Oliphant from South Scotland Destination Alliance. She's commenting on the South Scotland Destination Alliance, which is the new tourism marketing agency for the south of Scotland, and they're looking forward to working with us. You can actually, and the board doesn't know this yet, but you will soon be able to see material on South of Scotland Destination Alliance's website that was shot at Ellisland, featuring some of the specialist tours that we're going to develop with local storytellers for the Year of Storytelling, and we'll work with local food and drink producers, including Annandale Distillery, to deliver a unique visitor experience that will hopefully provide us with added value as well. That's something that will sell internationally to international visitors as well as in the UK. So look out for that soon. I'm really grateful to the work that South Scotland Destination Alliance have done for us, and we've really learned a lot from working with them and how to market yourself as a destination alliance.
Great. Well, we'd love to do writers' workshops, I think, as well. And yeah, so Stuart and Mark are commenting on that. I don't know Live Literature Scotland, so I don't know, Mark, if you want to come in and add something on that. But I think it's a great idea. So yeah, songwriting is really important to Ellisland, but also, Burns did write 1 or 2 poems there as well, and lots of letters.
Yeah, I can come in on the Live Literature Scotland. There's a scheme that's run through the Book Trust, Scottish Book Trust. So it would possibly be a source of funding for your full workshops, writers' workshops. Brilliant.
Yeah, sounds really good. So it's the Book Trust, yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, something to look at for the future. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we did have a successful event, a hybrid event last year with our American trustee, Ian Houston, who David mentioned, talking about Burns and influence on American progressive thought, and that was really well attended. So we hope to deliver some more of that kind of event this year. We did have a volunteer day recently, and thanks to everybody who attended that. We could do with volunteers to help us deliver events. At the moment, we don't have a great capacity in terms of staffing events. So anyone who would like to help us stage events and run the farm, we'd love to hear from you. Just go to the website.
Billy Kay has got his hand up.
Hi, that was fascinating, David.
Thanks, Billy.
One thing that strikes me, you mentioned Jean Armour, the huge imbalance between the image we have of Burns and the image we have of Jean Armour. The only image I know of Jean Armour is as a very old lady. And I wonder if I know historians might dispute this, but if there's a way to recreate how Jean would have looked when she was a young married woman at Ellisland, because we've scores of images of Burns looking young and sexy and manly and handsome, and Jean must have been the same as a woman, or Burns, Burns wouldn't have been attracted to her. She must have been a very, very beautiful woman, I think. So I just wonder if there's any way, a bit like the reconstruction of Robert the Bruce's face from the skull, whether you could do something to try and give an impression of Jean when she was living at Ellisland.
Yeah, it's a good point, Billy, and thanks for coming along as well. I cut my teeth as a curator at Burns House in Mauchline. That was back in 2000. And while I was there, so we had a Kellogg Brown bust of Jean, looking quite old, I have to say, and quite severe, matronly. And I always thought that's a bit of a shame, because there was a Kellogg Brown, quite a virile young Burns next to her. And I always found it unfair. But while I was in Mauchline, actually, the Mauchline statue, I don't know if you've seen it in Mauchline Cross,
Yes.
which is a bronze of Jean, was an attempt actually to reconstruct probably a lot of license given, but it was a young Jean Armour around about the time when she met Burns. So I suppose that is an attempt to turn back the clock in a sense and try to rebalance, as you say. But I'm not sure of any more scientific studies. You know, there's a scientific study done by the University of Dundee, I think, of the face of Burns, working from his the plaster cast of his skull and from archive sources, etc. It would be really interesting to do that with Jean. I know that we don't have the cast of the skull, but that there are bound to be ways of doing that, really, you know, based on portraits or the like.
Yep.
Good
Thank
point.
you.
Oh, Bill Dawson has said there was a computer regression. That was the wording I was trying to find, Bill, of Jean done some years ago. All right, okay. Well, maybe you could send me some info on that, or do you have Billy's details? Or a link? Yeah. Okay. Great. Were there any other questions? Joan, are you still there?
Yes, I'm still here. Yeah, I'm not sure if we do have any more questions. We've got. Oh yes, Marie Finlay, sorry, I missed you, Marie. Is there a link up with the council's Burns related facilities such as the Robert Burns Centre and Burns House? For example, many years ago, there was a Burns Trail booklet for children where children visited and had their book stamped and went into a competition. I can kind of say a little bit about that before handing over to David. There was a plan for that at the beginning. Unfortunately, it coincided with the beginning of the pandemic. So that was then re-evaluated, that project. It was actually an EU-funded project to promote literary tourism. And so the project had to be re-envisaged because there was nobody out and about visiting. So it was designed as a Footsteps of Burns website, which you can see online, and it features the main Burns centres in Dumfries and Ellisland. It was an Ellisland-led project, and it's a family-friendly trail, but certainly there is an argument to link things up in future. David?
Yeah, we just add we have a really good relationship with Dumfries Museums. They're storing some items for us, you know, which was very good of them, and we have some items on loan from them. So they're also helping us with our accreditation application. So really grateful to Dumfries Museums. I think there was a question earlier on our opening hours as well, Joan. So this was, are we intending to be a year-round attraction at Ellisland? So I suppose, yeah, in future when all's well, it's just that financially we've taken a wee bit of a hit and we're trying to consolidate the finances at the moment. So it just means that we've got to be a bit selective about opening hours. But I think as we develop our resources, then the aim would be to open as much as we can.
Yes, and of course we will be holding events, or aspiring, even if we can't open the site all year round, we'll hope to, during Burns season, to start opening for events again in Burns season. One of the things that we have done is to develop a membership tier for Burns clubs, and part of the offer for Burns clubs has been able to use our facilities for Burns suppers and so on. And so our first Burns club to take advantage of that aspect of their membership, the Sandiford Burns Club from Glasgow, they're coming very soon this month, in fact, and they're going to have a Burns supper on site, a springtime Burns supper. So we hope that more groups will take advantage of that.
I think Ian has his hand up, and do we have a legacy hand from Billy? Oh, it's a very good.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi, Ian.
Hi. Thank you. Excellent, wonderful, good paper, and it's very helpful. I'm interested in the Jean Armour issue. Here we have someone who historically has been kind of presented as maybe a wee bit of a drag on the poet. And as you say, the only image we have is from her when she was nearly as old as me. And how do we redress that? I mean, I think it's a wonderful opportunity. It's a family home. Kids are born here. She's obviously a great strength to him. How do we get through the fact that there's so little documentation and visualization?
Well, I think there would have to be a bit of license anyway. But that it's when I was putting together the talk, I had to remind myself she was only 23 when she came to Ellisland. So that's quite something, I think. I don't know what the full answer is, Ian, but I think we trustees went on a visit to Grasmere, to the Wordsworth Trust last summer, and they've done some excellent work, I think, really with video, immersive video around the site, and the new display area I think is really pretty good. It does represent Dorothy in a new light, and I think perhaps we could use some of the same approach to revivify Jean, and as Billy was saying earlier, to rebalance the story a bit. But it will be a challenge because all the focus is pretty much on Burns, and the collection is built around Burns in a sense. I
mean, I think the magic, if we're looking in 50 years' time, would be that we redressed some kind of balance there. But it's a tough one. I agree with you.
Yeah.
I'll go away now. Thank you for speaking.
Amanda Ferguson has asked, why do we have to assume that Jean was bonny? Might he have been attracted to her for her personality?
You don't expect me to answer that. Well, I mean, Burns celebrates Jean in his work as pretty, so we're taking him at his word, really. But yeah, it's a good point. I'm sure Burns appreciated her, and and she was a multi-dimensional person. He was in love with her, so yeah. But it's a good point. He clearly appreciated her singing voice, as I mentioned earlier, and her friendship, really, and her support, as well as her good looks. So, but we don't, as other people have said in some of the questions, we don't get a sense of that now that in the way she's represented at any site, not just Ellisland.
He did say, did he not say though, when he was writing to a friend, and you'll remember who it was, David, that he talked about how she had the kindest heart in the country?
I can't remember who that was. But yes, that's right, in the county. Yeah, I mean, Burns did say conflicting things, depending on his, who he's speaking to, the particular time, as we all do, I suppose, in our moments. So, so he wasn't without his flaws, I don't suppose. But we get some sense of Jean from her letters as well. And we think that she wrote some of them herself. So there was a kind of school of thought that she couldn't write, which I think can be easily dismissed. She certainly could read. We know that, and they perhaps found some common ground there in reflecting, discussing books from the time. And who knows, Jean perhaps had an interest in the library as well that was built by Burns and Riddle.
Thanks very much. And Lee McQueen, one of our volunteers, is saying that the Dumfries Howth Club had done a bit of research in the past on Jean, and I would love to hear from you. The Howth Club are one of our members, and we're hoping to welcome them on site.
Shout out to the Howth Club, yeah. Okay, great. And there was a link posted about the article on the it's Ronnie who posted that actually on the regression, further up the chat.
Well, thanks very much. If there aren't any more questions, I think I will hand over to Sarah, the chair of our Board of Trustees, Sarah Valentin Byers, if you want to say a few words to wind up, Sarah.
I can't start my video for some reason. Don't know if you can hear me, but yes, I just wanted to thank David so much. That was incredibly enlightening. I've been taking people on tours for, well, certainly last year, and I will be starting very soon this year. And I've learnt things on the objects that I didn't know, so I'm delighted. And you have also whetted our appetite to, for all the things to come at Ellisland. We have so much, in the future that we're looking forward to. Our bungalow is currently being redeveloped to become a world-class, I'm sure, accommodation, Burns themed. And we are also going to be doing some more work with tours, as Joan explained, possibly singing tours, poetry tours, and we hope to welcome all the world to Ellisland in September when the Robert Burns World Federation Congress takes place in Dumfries. So we hope very much that those of you who are not necessarily local and who are coming for that event will come and visit us at Ellisland. So thank you very much. You're all very welcome at Ellisland. In the next coming few months, we open this weekend. So yes, we'll be delighted to have you. Thank you very much.
Okay, good night. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.